Imagine a mission so audacious, so unbelievable, that it sounds like fiction, a secret operation to steal a nuclear submarine from the ocean floor, right under the nose of a superpower. This isn't a Hollywood script, it's the true story of Project Azorian. On February 24, 1968, from the Rybaki Naval Base in Kamchatka, located in the Soviet Union's Far East, the Soviet submarine K-129 embarked on what was supposed to be a routine patrol. Command rested with Captain First Rank Vladimir Kobzar, one of the Soviet Navy's most seasoned officers. A total of 98 Soviet Navy crewmen were on board with him. To an outsider, everything appeared normal, but K-129 was far from an ordinary submarine. Due to its formidable capabilities, it was known as the Soviet Navy's silent killer. This powerful Gulf II-class diesel-electric submarine possessed a singular and terrifying strength, its nuclear strike capability. Inside K-129 were three heavy R-21 ballistic missiles, each armed with a nuclear warhead of roughly 1 megaton. To put it plainly, this single submarine held the power to reduce even America's largest cities to rubble and ash in an instant. This was the intense period of the Cold War, an era when the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a desperate race for global superiority. It's frequently termed the era of brinkmanship, where the two superpowers stood so perilously close to war that even a minor misstep could have plunged the entire world into a nuclear inferno. In this relentless struggle for supremacy, extending from the vastness of space to the deepest oceans, both nations tirelessly sought to outmaneuver each other at every turn. The most perilous aspect of this power struggle was the nuclear triad, land-based missiles, aircraft delivering bombs from the sky, and most ominously, nuclear submarines, the deadliest piece on the geopolitical chessboard. These submarines could remain concealed underwater for months, stealthily approach an enemy coastline, and unleash a nuclear attack without warning. The most unsettling fact was their extreme difficulty to detect. Amidst this heightened tension, the Soviet Navy strategically deployed its most trusted weapons, and K-129 was an integral part of that strategy. Its mission was to patrol near Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean, enabling it to target major U.S. naval bases and cities should war erupt. With this critical mission, K-129 ventured deeper into the Pacific. Nearly 12 days into its journey, it was now in the vast expanse of the North Pacific, approximately 2,510 kilometers northwest of Hawaii, in a desolate stretch of ocean. This was a strategically sensitive zone, offering an advantageous vantage point for monitoring America's west coast. Up to that precise moment, everything seemed normal. However, on March 8, 1968, something catastrophic transpired in the ocean depths, sending shockwaves from Moscow to Washington. Under stringent Soviet Navy regulations, every submarine was required to transmit a radio signal to Moscow headquarters at a predetermined time, allowing its location and status to be tracked. But on that day, K-129's regular signal abruptly ceased. Operators repeatedly attempted to establish contact, but all they received was an unnerving silence. That silence on the radio was the unmistakable harbinger of a coming storm. Initially, Soviet commanders tried to reassure themselves, speculating it might just be a technical glitch. Yet, days turned into weeks, and still, there was no contact with K-129. Now, even the Soviet High Command began to be consumed by worry, haunted by the chilling fear that the Americans might have intercepted their submarine, or worse, that it had sunk. This growing dread compelled the Soviet Union to launch the largest search and rescue operation in its history. Dozens of warships and reconnaissance aircraft fanned out across the maritime zone where K-129 was last believed to be. The search continued day and night, every faint signal and every shadow was treated with utmost suspicion. For an entire month, the Soviet Navy scoured every corner of the sea, but their exhaustive efforts yielded absolutely nothing. Despite all their resources and determination, there was no trace of the submarine. They remained completely unaware of what had befallen K-129, the 3 nuclear warheads it carried, or the 98 men on board. It was as if the ocean had swallowed the submarine whole. In the end, exhausted and defeated, the Soviet Union reluctantly called off the search. For them, this was not merely a military loss, it was a profound strategic tragedy. They had not only lost 98 sailors, but those 3 nuclear warheads were also missing, representing some of the most sensitive, top-secret technology of the era. The Soviet leadership's greatest fear was that if the technology behind those missiles somehow fell into American hands, their national security would be utterly compromised. And that fear, as it turned out, was far from unfounded. Throughout the Soviet search operation, the United States had been quietly, yet intently, observing every Soviet move. When Soviet ships and aircraft repeatedly returned to the same patch of the Pacific, frantically hunting for their missing submarine K-129, American intelligence began to suspect something was seriously amiss. Crucially, as early as March 8, America's top-secret sound surveillance system, known as SOSUS, had already recorded the distinct sound of a massive underwater explosion deep in the ocean, giving them a rough idea that a catastrophic event had occurred beneath the waves. This, combined with the frantic Soviet search, soon led the CIA to confirm it. The Soviet submarine K-129, along with its nuclear warheads, had indeed vanished somewhere in the ocean. And from this point, the story takes a new and utterly shocking turn. The CIA had no intention of merely observing. It was preparing to undertake an operation that would redefine the very standards of espionage, a plan that sounded like sheer madness, but if successful, would make history. The CIA decided it wouldn't just find the lost Soviet submarine K-129, it would steal it, right from under the Soviet Union's nose. For America, this presented an unprecedented opportunity. If they could retrieve the missiles or even significant parts of the submarine and reverse engineer them, they could gain invaluable insights into the workings of the Soviet nuclear system and better prepare for potential future Soviet attacks. That's why, as soon as the Soviets conceded defeat and called off their search, the US immediately launched its own covert mission to find it, codenamed Operation Sand Dollar. Using data from various monitoring stations, the US was able to pinpoint the submarine's near-exact location in the depths of the Pacific, close to the international date line. Once the location was confirmed, they deployed their most advanced and covert submarine, the USS Halibut, a special vessel modified specifically for espionage. Halibut was essentially a moving, high-tech laboratory beneath the sea, capable of uncovering enemy secrets even thousands of meters down in pitch-black depths. On July 15, 1968, while the world's attention remained fixed on the Vietnam War and the space race, USS Halibut departed Pearl Harbor on an extremely secret mission. Although the U.S. Navy had significantly narrowed the search area using sound data, it still encompassed thousands of square kilometers. For weeks, Halibut meticulously searched the dark ocean, thousands of meters down, employing sophisticated sonar arrays and robotic cameras. Each day, hundreds of photographs were taken, and photo technicians on the surface meticulously examined them. Gradually, the total number of images climbed to more than 20,000. And then the historic moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. When those 20,000 images were analyzed closely, the CIA's analysis room fell into a profound silence. The photos captured a scene at roughly 4,877 meters deep that left everyone stunned. Clearly visible was the Soviet K-129, lying broken on the seabed, its huge torn chunks of metal scattered around. Nearby, deadly nuclear warheads could be seen, and even parts of the submarine's internal machinery were visible. America was now 100% certain they had found the exact location of the Soviet silent killer that had sunk for reasons still unknown. Not only that, CIA experts realized one nuclear missile was still largely intact. The entire submarine weighed around 2,700 tons, but the CIA's focus was on a section weighing roughly 1,500 to 1,750 tons, as that part was most likely to contain the intact missile and sensitive equipment. Now, only one thought consumed them: if they could somehow lift that section to the surface, they might get their hands on Soviet nuclear technology, and perhaps even secret codes. But achieving that jackpot would be anything but easy. Even if the Soviet Union hadn't managed to find its own submarine, it would never tolerate America hauling it away from under its nose. And even if the US managed to deceive the Soviets, the biggest challenge remained: how do you bring something that heavy up from nearly 5 kilometers below the surface? Until then, the heaviest object ever recovered from such depths was only about 50 tons. The targeted section of K-129 was more than 30 times heavier. The mission was so risky it sparked significant conflict between the U.S. Navy and the CIA. The Navy believed it was practically impossible and far too dangerous, fearing that if the Soviet Union got wind of it, it could escalate into open war. The CIA, on the other hand, was determined to carry it out at any cost. They knew the chance of success was barely 10%, but they refused to let such a monumental opportunity slip away. And that's where the CIA's master plan begins, a scheme that sounds no less thrilling than a Hollywood blockbuster. In January 1969, immediately after Richard Nixon assumed the presidency of the United States, he gave the CIA the green light. The CIA promptly sprang into action and launched Project Azorian. First, they needed a cover story so utterly convincing that the Soviets wouldn't even suspect America was planning to steal their submarine. But the problem was, how do you conceal an operation of this immense scale from the sharp eyes of the Soviet Union? That's when the legendary American billionaire businessman Howard Hughes entered the story. At the time, Hughes had a well-established reputation for funding strange and incredibly ambitious projects. The CIA shrewdly leveraged this public image and, working directly with Hughes, devised a plan so audacious it could make anyone's head spin. The world was informed that Howard Hughes was embarking on a revolutionary deep-sea mining project to extract rare minerals, particularly manganese nodules, from the ocean floor. The cover story was crafted with such meticulous detail and believability that not only the Soviet Union, but even the U.S. Congress, the scientific community, and the general public accepted it as true. Scientific papers were published under the guise of Hughes Tool Company, leading industry experts were brought in, and the narrative was carefully planted and disseminated in the media. To further bolster the story's credibility, the CIA added a touch of Hollywood glamour. The well-known actor Robert Anderson was made the public face of the project, ensuring it appeared to be a genuine commercial venture by a wealthy businessman. The plan was so cunning that no one suspected that behind this seemingly legitimate mining project lay the Cold War's most daring heist. Behind the elaborate cover story, a ship called the Hughes Glomar Explorer was being constructed, a vessel unlike anything anyone could possibly imagine. At 188.7 meters long and weighing around 50,000 tons, it looked like an ordinary mining vessel from the outside, but the sophisticated technology hidden within its structure was far beyond the era's imagination. The CIA understood that if the Soviet submarine were lifted and brought directly to the surface, Soviet satellites and surveillance aircraft would spot it immediately. So, they ingeniously designed the entire extraction system to operate within the ship itself. The true secrets were hidden deep within its gigantic hull. In the lower section was a massive, secret door known as a moon pool, large enough for an entire submarine to fit inside. Concealed within that moon pool was a gigantic claw, codenamed Clementine. Its monumental task was to descend nearly 5 kilometers to the ocean floor, firmly grip K-129, and slowly pull it up directly into the ship. This meant the entire recovery operation would happen underwater, ensuring that Soviet aircraft overhead or ships nearby wouldn't notice a thing. Preparing for this mission took more than 5 years and cost approximately $800 million, an enormous investment for that time. And this is where the Cold War's most dangerous phase truly began. It was no longer just about one submarine, but about the supremacy, technological advantage, and future security of two global superpowers. The morning of June 20, 1974 marked one of the tensest moments in Cold War history. The CIA launched its boldest operation, and the Hughes Glomar Explorer set off, cutting purposefully through the waves of the Pacific. Approximately 200 crew members were on board. From the outside, they appeared to be Hughes Company employees engaged in extracting rare minerals from the sea. In reality, the crew comprised a mix of CIA agents, skilled U.S. Navy specialists, and contractors. To maintain their intricate deception and avoid Soviet surveillance, the crew carried out fake mining activities, ensuring no satellite or ship would suspect their true intentions. On July 4, 1974, the Glomar Explorer reached the precise location where, 5 kilometers below, K-129 lay on the seabed. The American team began their work in complete secrecy, but the mission was anything but easy. On one side, they contended with immense technical challenges, while on the other, Soviet ships and aircraft were ominously circling the area. The atmosphere was so thick with tension that everyone's heart pounded with anxiety. The US knew that if this audacious gamble went wrong, it wouldn't merely result in one ship being caught, it could easily trigger a direct confrontation between two nuclear superpowers. CIA officials were still weighing these profound risks when something occurred that cast a dark shadow over the entire mission. As the American team was secretly lowering the Claw into the sea, 2 Soviet ships, SSV-10 and Chasma, abruptly altered their course, moved directly towards the Glomar Explorer, and positioned themselves around it. Moments later, a sharp Soviet voice crackled over the radio, demanding to know what they were doing in the area. The control room fell silent. The faces of the CIA agents drained of color. One terrifying thought raced through everyone's mind: have they figured it out? But then, the meticulously pre-prepared cover story saved them. With unwavering confidence and cleverness, the crew replied that they were conducting deep-sea mining for billionaire Howard Hughes, extracting manganese nodules from the seabed, and that this research would take a few weeks. Soviet officers eyed the giant ship and its strange towers suspiciously. The Soviet Union rarely trusted anything America said, but upon hearing mining and Howard Hughes, they were ultimately taken in, largely because the media had already widely disseminated the story worldwide. After monitoring the situation for a while, the Soviet ships finally changed course and disappeared back into the waves. Only then did everyone in the Glomar Explorer's control room finally breathe again. Without wasting another moment, the mission commander ordered the deployment of the massive Claw, Clementine. The huge moon pool doors inside the hull slowly opened, and the colossal Claw began its descent into the dark depths. But getting it down nearly 5 kilometers was an almost impossible feat to lower it. Incredibly long steel pipes were connected together, forming a chain thousands of meters long. Engineers and technicians were drenched in sweat as the ship's massive drilling tower gradually fed those pipes into the ocean. The painstaking process took days, with millions of dollars and America's credibility hanging in the balance every single second. Finally, after days of intense tension and immense patience, the ship's sensors confirmed that the giant Claw was positioned directly above the K-129 wreckage. In that pitch-black depth where sunlight never penetrates, the Claw tightened its steel grip and seized the Soviet submarine, the very one the Soviet Union had assumed was lost forever. Then, the arduous lift began. The pipes were pulled back up at an excruciatingly slow pace to maintain the submarine's balance. After days of exhausting work, just as the submarine had risen significantly, a terrifying jolt shook the entire Glomar Explorer. Parts of the giant Claw could not withstand the immense pressure and weight, and one by one, they began to snap. Panic erupted in the control room. The monitors showed the Claw's grip weakening and the submarine losing its delicate balance. As the main structure failed, roughly 2/3 of the submarine broke away under its own weight and the crushing pressure, plummeting back into the dark abyss from which it had been so painstakingly lifted. For the CIA, it was a devastating shock, because the most valuable prize, the Soviet nuclear missiles and their control system, were in the rear section that had broken off and fallen back down. The tension and despair in the control room at that moment are almost impossible to put into words. Still, the smaller portion that remained in the Claw's weakened grip was carefully pulled into the ship's moon pool. America had recovered only the forward section of the submarine. Yet, even this incomplete victory brought some measure of relief to U.S. intelligence. They obtained 2 Soviet nuclear torpedoes, a major breakthrough for understanding Soviet underwater firepower and warhead design. They also recovered cryptographic machines and secret documents, offering a rough but invaluable insight into Soviet naval communications and operating methods. Additionally, they acquired Soviet sonar equipment and other important instruments. In a poignant discovery, the CIA also found the bodies of 6 Soviet sailors. They buried them at sea with full military honors, and even filmed the funeral, a gesture of respect that would later become historically significant. But the CIA was still not satisfied. They remained obsessed with obtaining the nuclear missiles and code books that had fallen back down with the wreckage. So, they immediately began preparing a second operation, codenamed Project Matador. However, fate had other plans, and one of the biggest exposures in the history of espionage was about to unfold. During this operation, highly classified documents were stolen from Howard Hughes's office, documents that contained the unvarnished truth about the entire mission. When CIA Director William E. Colby learned of the theft, his concern grew sharply. He feared that if the information got out, not only would the first operation be exposed, provoking Soviet fury, but the second operation would be dead before it even began. That's why Colby secretly appealed to newspapers suspected of possessing the files, urging them not to leak anything, emphasizing that it was a matter of paramount national security. For a while, things remained under control. But on February 7, 1975, the Los Angeles Times published a report linking the stolen documents to the CIA and the submarine recovery mission. The real blow, however, came in March 1975, when investigative journalist Jack Anderson exposed the entire operation on national television. He stated plainly that the Glomar Explorer was not a mining ship at all, it was an espionage tool specifically built to steal a Soviet submarine. He also criticized the government, arguing that taxpayers' money was being wasted on such pointless operations. The news spread like wildfire. The world finally learned the truth about the secret mission the CIA had so desperately tried to hide. The Soviet Union was predictably furious. They immediately deployed warships to the location to ensure America couldn't return. They also issued a stern warning: if the US attempted to go back, it would be considered an act of war. For the CIA, it was a major diplomatic humiliation, and they were forced to permanently shut down the second operation. Interestingly, when journalists questioned the CIA about the incident, they famously gave an answer that is still renowned in the intelligence world today: we can neither confirm nor deny. After this incident, that phrase became known as the Glomar response, now an established part of legal and espionage vocabulary. And so, the remaining secrets of K-129 were buried forever in the ocean's dark depths. Even today, it remains a mystery how K-129 sank in the first place. Later, several famous films and documentaries were made, inspired by this extraordinary mission, including Azorian, The Raising of the K-129, The Spy Who Loved Me, and Phantom. Another striking detail: the video of the funeral for the 6 Soviet sailors was handed over to Russia in 1992, following the collapse of the Soviet Union. The submarine's bell was also returned as a symbolic gift. But America didn't just film the funeral, it recorded the entire operation, including the moment the submarine was lifted from nearly 5 kilometers down. That footage remains highly classified and has never been made public. This incredible story still serves as a powerful reminder of how dangerous the Cold War era was, a time when the hunger for an enemy's secrets reached such a fever pitch of madness that even the deepest ocean trench couldn't halt human ambition and obsession.